Representative Cornish, you wish to move your bill?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, I'd like to move House File 12 to be recommended to pass and move referred to the Transportation Policy and Finance Committee.
Representative Cornish moves his bill to Transportation and Finance.
Okay, members, basically House File 12 is a very simple bill in structure, but it's a very important bill. I think you'll soon find out. What House File 12 does is establish a blue alert system. The blue alert system, basically in layman's terms, is a system where they have a notification if a cop has been seriously injured or critically injured. That'll be wording that we'll come up with probably by the end of the two committees. But if you've been seriously injured or killed, a notification would go out on electronic media and crime alerts, things like this. Now, I'm not as good as explaining this as our person will be from the Department of Public Safety, who will be up here later, but what this bill does is use the current Amber Alert system for abduction of children and something, how we've been using it in the past. It'll use the current system, and the fiscal note was asked for and it was received, and it came back officially zero cost. And whatever small minimal cost would be absorbed by the organizations. So the bill doesn't cost us anything. It uses the existing network, and just for a quick, for instance, if a cop, he or she was seriously injured or killed, then the Amber Alert system would be used to notify the public. And the DPS person will explain this more and how the system works and the input they'll take and the rules that they'll prescribe for the use of this thing, such as, you know, what is seriously injured or what is critically injured and how the notifications will go out. So rather than take questions now, if you don't mind, I would like I think I would rather have a survivor come up and testify first, Susan Merrily. And then after she's done, maybe have the DPS explain how it would work. So I'll have my testifier come up.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Yes, I'm Susan Merrily, and I'm president of the state chapter of Concerns of Police Survivors. So as a survivor, I run a nonprofit organization that assists in resources and peer support for our families that have lost loved ones in the state of Minnesota. And I am also a survivor. I've been part of this organization for the past year and have met a lot of the survivors, the Patricks, the Schneiders, the Deckers. And I can tell you that every time a law enforcement officer goes down, if he's shot in the line of duty or if he's injured, as a survivor, your heart sinks and you're glued to the news. And all you care about is those families and what they're going through. And I had a chance to go out to the candlelight vigil the night that Officer Patrick went down, and the community, the support, and the concern that this perpetrator was still out on the loose and really not knowing much about him. So I think putting this blue alert system in place will put many people at ease and also hopefully deter that person from killing another officer or another civilian. So Concerns of Police Survivors does support this blue alert system. Thank you.
Any questions at this time? Thank you.
And then hopefully my Department of Public Safety person.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Janelle Rasmussen. I am the Minnesota Amber Alert Coordinator at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And Representative Cornish asked that I talk briefly about the Amber Alert plan and the technology that we use in the state of Minnesota to activate an Amber Alert here, which has been a very successful program, not only Minnesota, but throughout. The Amber Alert system, when we activate it, utilizes the Minnesota Crime Alert Network, the Emergency Alert System, social media, the Department of Transportation road signs. We do it through WIA, which is the Wireless Emergency Alert Network, so all cell phones are being activated. And we're able to do that very quickly and rapidly to get the information out about an abducted child whose life is in danger. The Minnesota Crime Alert Network is something that's unique to Minnesota and now Wisconsin, and that's a system where we're able to send out alerts through broadcast technology. We send alerts out through that system by fax, email, and text messages. So when we have any sort of a crime in Minnesota, local law enforcement agencies are trained on how to send these alerts out. And we put this information out to the entire state of Minnesota in a matter of just a couple of minutes. So it's a very effective technology that we have available and that would integrate well with the Blue Alert as well. So we're able to do that in just a matter of a couple of minutes and get accurate, timely information out to not only law enforcement, the media, but also to businesses and organizations as well. We have about 15,000 businesses and associations that are in the Crime Alert Network. So when we're sending this information out, like I said, it not only goes to the media where they can rebroadcast it, but it goes to law enforcement and then all of these other partners as well. So gas stations, grocery stores, hospitals, schools, everybody will receive this information immediately as it is issued.
One thing that I forgot to mention, Mr. Chair and members, was the one of the reasons is probably about 1975 was the first time I ever heard when I was a policeman in Amboy, Minnesota, one officer got shot. And of course, then there was really no electronic messaging system. And since then, we've sat, as probably Officer Johnson and Schoen here have in the squad car and heard countless number of times these officers either get seriously assaulted or killed. And the system is improving, but this would be one more to put eyes and ears out there to look for them, because many times after the assault has taken place or the death, these people escape in a vehicle, and so this system would really be helpful in apprehension, a quicker apprehension before these people get out into the general public and do more damage. I'm glad to answer any questions if there are any.
Representative Hurtas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the Amber Alert, the Blue Alert, if implemented, is two systems we hope we don't have to use very often. But I recently flew out to Washington, and in getting in a rental car and driving to my hotel, I noticed over the highway there was Amber Alert on the electronic reader system. And by the time I got checked into the hotel, with the aid of all these eyes and ears in the public, on the TV, on the news, that individual had been located already. I was wondering if you had any data. I'm not sure how many times we implement the Amber Alert system, and would the Blue Alert system statistically probably be utilized more than the Amber Alert system?
Mr. Chair, Representative Hurtas, the Amber Alert system, since we began the program here in Minnesota in 2001, has been activated 28 times, and we have recovered successfully 28 children.
Thank you.
Representative Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just was wondering if there's any concerns at all about overtaxing the system. I think somewhere along the line I had heard they were talking about doing it with senior citizens also. Are there any concerns along those lines?
Mr. Chair, Representative Considine, we do have a very defined set of criteria for Amber Alert in Minnesota, so we follow that criteria very strictly and work closely with local law enforcement agencies, and we've been very fortunate to follow that very carefully and not activate Amber Alerts for cases that do not meet that criteria. So we have activated it very rarely in Minnesota. For instance, last year we had 0 activations of the system, but it is a concern in other states, and I am familiar with that as well.
And then I might add, too, that we're going to look at the bill. It's going to move to transportation. There's a couple of amendments we're considering. One is possibly changing seriously to critically, but maybe we'll leave that up to the DPS when they talk to the different law enforcement agencies and groups. And then the other change might be is there is a couple of groups, advisory groups, that represent some PSAPs, these dispatchers around. They wanted to be included in the area of the bill that you see where they're going to ask for input. And I've talked to DPS, and they said that that would be no problem to include another group in there if they would like to be. So that's a couple of the things we're thinking about as the bill moves forward.
Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Cornish, for getting this started. And I think, of course, I'm just going to have comments. I don't have questions because you know I support it, and I'm going to be on the bill. But what I want the public to understand is that we value all lives, and we think that the citizens and police officers' lives are equally valuable, but those of us that have put on the uniform and our families that have watched us leave the door and know what could happen every day. And the reality is, the reason, even more so, not just for the officers involved, but the families and the public safety to put this measure into place, a person that takes an officer's life has really committed themselves to an act that is irreversible, and there is virtually no hope left. And these are not people that we want roaming our streets, going into our schools, or having any opportunity to have any more freedom than they do for their last seconds of freedom. And so this is a good bill, because by the time that we're ready to publicly announce who they are, which hopefully in some circumstances are pretty quick, or who we want to find, the day that Officer Patrick was gunned down, I was working and was there. And the minute that we knew who that suspect was, we wanted to get that out as quickly as possible. And we still had difficulties in between agencies and just getting the NCIC alert so that we could get attempt to locate to all the counties. And even with our radio systems that are interoperable, it's still some bit of cumbersome activity. And that could be up to an hour later. And now we want people looking out their windows. We want people looking at each other when they're going down the interstate. And we need the public to be a part of that. Because when we lose an officer, we lose a little bit of our freedom in this country, and we lose what's our binding fabric of safety.
Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in support of this bill, and the question I would have, Representative Cornish, several times in the last year or two, I've received severe weather alerts, and I think it was 1 or 2 Amber alerts on my mobile phone, and I want to know if this bill would also utilize a mobile technology, and if so, how is that utilized? Who makes that decision, and how is that pushed out to a geographic area?
Representative Lucero, or Mr. Chair, Representative Lucero, if you don't mind letting my testifier answer that.
Mr. Chair, Representative Lucero, that technology on your phone is through the wireless emergency alert. It's part of the iPause system, so that's coming from a federal level. And they have 3 different alerts that are activated on your phone. The first is a presidential alert, and that is something that you automatically have on your phone if it's WIA capable. The second is a Amber alert. That's an alert that is automatically on your phone. However, you can opt out. However, we highly encourage you not to. And then the third is a weather alert, which you can opt into. So those are the alerts that come through that iPause federal technology. Then at the state level, through the Minnesota Crime Alert Network, we have, if you're a subscriber of the network, you can receive alerts like Amber alerts through your text messaging as well.
Follow-up,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and so would this alert be incorporated in that technology to be able to utilize mobile devices?
Chair Johnson, Representative Lucero, it would be at the state level. However, at the federal level, it would not be at this time. They are currently, I understand, working on legislation there as well to incorporate other alerts into that system and that technology.
Representative Quant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just trying to get some clarification on this bill. There are fortunately very few occurrences, and I was wondering why at least in my area, other first responders are dispatched through the same LEC system as law enforcement, fire, first responders, et cetera. And because, again, it's rare, but it does happen where people will set a fire or place a bomb or do something and then wait for the responders to show, whether they be law enforcement, fire, or EMT and first responders, and then they're added to the casualties of the situation. If there was a in line of duty casualty of another first responder, is there any consideration of having them included? Because if they're going after any dispatched first responder, they will go after law enforcement and others. Just as was mentioned, these are not nice people, and the sooner we get them, the better.
Mr. Chair and Representative Quam, if you're asking if first responders or anybody else on the front line is being considered in this bill other than peace officers, the answer is no, not at this time.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would hope you would look at that possibility because, again, at least in my part of the state, they're dispatched in the same manner to similar and often the same, occurrences. And in line of duty, I think would be a reasonable. And again, hopefully things are rare and get rarer. But again, we're here because bad things happen to good people.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my comment is representative of an area that recently had one of these. I think it would have been a great asset to have that. But my question to you, where else is this being used in the country and how effective has it been?
I believe, well, you answered the question, my testifier, maybe as to how many states. I think I had heard 22 from my other testifier, something like that. Maybe you can verify if it's.
Chair Johnson, Representative. The last I checked in the National Blue Alert System, there were 20 states that had a formalized statewide plan for Blue Alert.
Representative Newberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Cornish, for bringing this bill forward. I too support this, and I think it's a good idea. I'm building a little bit on Representative Quam's remarks. As an EMS provider, it's exceedingly dangerous at times, especially for firefighters, first responders. When we're on the side of the road, we average, the statistics here, there are about 13 EMS line of duty deaths every year. My question would be, would build on this, would be in the case of a hit and run, where we have firefighters or EMS workers who get struck by cars that don't slow down or don't merge over, and they're killed or critically wounded. As these, if you have these drivers who do this, who take off, I think that this would be a great opportunity to include this first responders as well and paramedics. There's really a good case up in Clearwater on 94 where we had a firefighter who got hit. I know the man in this case, and the injuries were lifelong and life changing. So I would just ask that maybe we could have a discussion offline, possibly about being open to that, where we have an EMS, firefighter, paramedic, first responder, but if we have a hit and run type of case, where that would be included in this part of the equation. But as we stand right now, as the bill currently reads, I think this is a good bill. I think it's a good idea, and I look forward to voting yes on it. I just would like to encourage you to be open to building on it a little bit to include all of the people that respond.
Mr. Chair, members, I would be interested in looking at it, but I refer back to Representative Considine's questions. If we start doing that, then the EMS ambulance personnel would naturally have a liking to be on it, but then we're going to have to look at MnDOT workers and how many of them are killed on the side of the road by the cones and things that get run over. And the more we put on it, I worry about the frequency that the Amber Alert system is used, and therefore taking away from the unique once in a great while thing, but I'll sure talk about with you offline, you bet.
Any other further questions? Representative Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Cornish. And I'm not sure who, just in terms of the connection with the other districts, the other states that are using a Blue Alert system, those of us who live close to the borders, and if there were such an incident, I'm assuming that you would also be coordinating with neighboring states, because people don't necessarily try to disappear into the metropolitan area and get lost there. They might be trying to cross state lines. So is there some thought of coordinating with other states and expanding this so that it doesn't necessarily have to be a national program, but at least coordinating with other states who are using the Blue Alert and maybe encouraging our neighboring states to do that?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I can tell you that with the Amber Alert plan, we do coordinate with all of the other states and work very closely together. And so we're able to activate, for instance, in Wisconsin, if we have a child who's taken across the border, we work closely with our partners there. And each state has an Amber Alert coordinator, and we are aware of the criteria in our neighboring states and the national criteria, so we're able to activate. In fact, Minnesota's was the first state to have an interstate activation where we had a child taken from St. Cloud to Utah, and we activated their plan there, and then they were able to successfully recover that child for us. So we do work closely with our neighboring states as well.
Representative Ward?
I guess my question was more about the neighboring states and their use of the Blue Alert. I'm really grateful for the work that Amber Alert has done nationwide, but how are we going to move this forward for the Blue Alert?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'm not familiar with the neighboring states' Blue Alert criteria, procedures, or programs, but I think that if we were to have Blue Alert in Minnesota, that's something we could definitely work on, is working with our neighboring states.
Representative Shawn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Rasmussen, that couple of questions around here sparked something for me. Do any other states have this titled as maybe a public safety officer that would include paramedics, firefighters, and police officers that you know of?
Mr. Chair, Representative Schoen, I am not familiar with other
Okay.
states' criteria or procedures.
Thank you.
Anyone from the audience wishing to testify on this bill? Okay, just Representative Cornish, I want to thank you for bringing this forward. I myself have been in the situation not once but twice where I've had either coffee or dinner with an officer in the evening, and we're looking for the person who took his life later that night. Getting this information out to the public with the proper information and the criteria that's being set up, I believe, is a very good thing. Not only in order to help to apprehend the suspect, but also for the safety of the people of this state. By using that, similar to the Amber Alert system, if it happens in the daytime, we can instantly get the schools in the area locked down to protect the children. So I think this is a good thing, and I want to thank you again for bringing this forward. Representative Cornish, you want to renew your motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members, I'd like to renew my motion. First, I'd like to thank my testifiers for coming up here today and helping me out. And I'd like to renew my motion that House File 12 be recommended to pass and move to the Transportation Policy and Finance Committee.
Representative Cornish renews his motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.